in which I express my opinions of what's going on in what I like to call the COVID-19 theater. Now, the fact that I've used the word theater probably already tells you what my opinion is about it. And indeed, I do think that there is a lot of theater going on. I think there's a lot of pretending, a lot of false information, and people are accepting that things are real when in fact they're not. So let me tell you why I think that and give you a few details. It's hard to break all of this down into 3 minutes, and to get it organized, though, I think, in my mind, I'd like to divide it into two parts. The first part is the science, bad science, let's call it, in my view, bad science. And the second part is hidden agenda. There are things going on that are not visible on the surface. There are people with motives to distort the information to the general public. I know that's hard for many people to believe. There are still a lot of naive people out there, and I'd like to think that everything that the authorities tell us is absolutely true. We can depend on them. After all, they are the authorities and all that. But anyway, when I get to that part, I'd like to tell you why I think that, in this case especially, is not true. But let's talk about the science. Now, first of all, as you all know, I'm not a scientist. I'm not a doctor. I'm not a researcher. But I mean a laboratory type researcher. I'm a pretty good researcher when it comes to researching the scientific literature and reading the books and all that kind of stuff and trying to figure it out. Seems like I spend a lot of my time with my nose in a dictionary or an encyclopedia trying to figure out what these words mean, and especially when you get into the scientific area. A lot of highfalutin words, you have to figure it out. But it's not so hard if you just stick with it a little bit. And I'm used to it. That's what I do. It's my job, so to speak. So even though I'm not a researcher and a scientist, I think I have a pretty good handle on the topic, especially as it applies to COVID-19. So the first thing I'd like to talk about is the data. Now, this is easier for me to talk about today than it would have been maybe a month ago, because increasingly I've seen in the mainstream media even more and more reports about the fact that the data is not reliable, that the data has been exaggerated, that the data has been distorted to make it appear like the fatality rate and the harm rate, the disease spreading rate is much, much greater than it really is. Now, if I had said that a month ago or 2 months ago, probably everybody would have been deeply offended and horrified and think I had a tin hat on or something. But now it's even in the mainstream press. And the fact is, in case you haven't noticed, is that the directives came out from the highest levels of authority, from the World Health Organization and from the CDC, the directives. And we even heard, I have a video in my collection here of the lady doctor there at the White House giving a presentation before a news conference, and it was all filmed and videotaped and sent around the world, which she says, yes, we instruct everybody to label as many deaths as possible as COVID-19, even though we have no evidence that those deaths were caused by COVID-19. She says our directives are to label them as COVID-19. It's an incredible statement, and the same thing now we find out was going on at the World Health Organization. Doctors were writing in and calling in and complaining, we're being asked to lie. Doctors have said, well, you can go on the internet, look it for yourself. They're irate. They said, we have to lie in order to participate in the system. And they don't like it. And they were rebelling against it. And I think largely because of that resistance from the doctors and the nurses and some of the hospital staffs as well, the word has gotten out that, yep, this has been going on all right. And you know what I'm talking about. People who have been, a lot of these people who are dying, by the way, as you know, are advanced in age. I mean, even older than I am. And some of them are in these nursing homes. And they're on their way out, unfortunately. They're going to go any day anyway. But regardless if they're 95 or 102 and they die, their death certificates are going to say, yep, COVID-19 did it, even though they might have had a heart attack or had surgery that was very debilitating, or maybe they had diabetes, or gosh only knows. People who are very, very sick from other conditions. Some of them even have been in accidents. They've been killed in an automobile accident. And their deaths are marked as COVID-19. Now, why is that? Well, we get the information coming back from peripheral sources. Somebody's trying to defend this proposition, and they do it this way. They say, well, we thought it was a good idea to exaggerate the death count because we wanted to scare people into taking this seriously. We didn't want them to take it cavalierly, you know. We wanted them to get serious and lock themselves in and do exactly what we're telling them to do, because if they were a little afraid, if they could see that this was possibly a pandemic, well, then they'll take it seriously and they'll do what they're supposed to do, and we will save lives. Okay, that's how they're beginning to explain it now. So you see, they lied for our own good. It was for our good that they're lied to us. That will be their excuse. Now, is that true, though? No, I don't think it's true at all, because as you'll see, there are other much more powerful motives for these people to lie than for our own good. Frankly, I don't think that's a primary motive at all for many of these people, especially at the very top. The higher you go, the more you find that situation. So anyway, we know the statistics are badly skewed, and they're not even close to what we have been told. When you really strip out all of the fraud and all of the deliberate deception, and by the way, I have to say that many of these cases, let's talk about the word cases. You read in the paper all the time, well, another 75 cases were discovered today in our hometown, or in the state where there were 3,000 cases this week, cases of coronavirus, COVID-19. 3,000 cases, and people are, oh my gosh, 3,000 people are dying. No, cases does not mean people are dying. It doesn't mean that even close. A case, here's what a case means in terms of, most of the times we see it in the press, here's what it means. It's a person who thought they might have maybe had COVID-19, or they might have been in contact with someone who maybe had COVID-19. Or maybe they had symptoms similar to what COVID-19 would be. Or all of those things. Or because they just, we thought they looked like they were sick of COVID-19. There is no proof. Cases don't require anything to be classified as a case except for somebody to say, well, that's probably a COVID-19 case. And so you can have 3,000 or 30,000 or 3 million. It makes no difference. Just put a number to it. You don't have to prove it in any way. So cases are determined like that. And even if you had a test that could be relied upon, we find out that the tests don't do anything either. The standard test, and very few of them are actually made, by the way, but even when a standard test is made, it's the test, all it does is test for antibodies. Antibodies that are produced by a virus. Now, notice I said a virus. I didn't say the COVID-19 virus. And that's the truth. It comes from a virus, any virus in the coronavirus family. Now, there are lots of those. Our common seasonal flu is in that category. And ladies and gentlemen, if you got the flu, and there are millions of people that get the flu every year, millions, and you happen to go get that test, you're going to test positive for COVID-19, because the test is not specific to the 19 one, or the number 2 actually is this number. These antibodies are produced by all of those viruses. So you put this together and you shake it up in the bag and you look in there and it's just a mess. There's nothing scientific about it at all. It's all made up numbers, and it's made there, and it's done deliberately to scare us. Now, you can think that they were doing a good job of scaring us for our own good, if you wish, but as we'll see in a moment, I don't think that that's their motive for doing so. But I'd like to emphasize as firmly as I can that if you rely on the statistics, the official statistics that are coming out, you're making a huge mistake, because you're being fooled. So the other thing that's on my list here is about this shelter-in-place nonsense. We have at our website, by the way, when I say our website, I'm talking about the redpilluniversity.org. We've been collecting video statements and interviews and documentaries made by really first-class scientists and researchers in this field. People with degrees, people from reputable organizations, doctors, surgeons, epidemiologists, We have one fellow there who is a Nobel Prize winner. Yeah, this is the quality of people we're talking about. And this Nobel Prize winner, he knows his stuff. That's his specialty, is studying the effects and the patterns of pandemic diseases. And all of these people, every one of them, say that this whole business of sheltering in place is the worst thing you can do. If you want to really save lives and not just go through the theater and puffing out your chest and saying shelter in place and save lives, you see that everywhere. If you're not just trying to look good and sound good, if you're really following science, you'll know that that is the worst thing you can do, they say. Why? Well, let's see if I can summarize it. Why? They say that these pandemics, and they happen all the time, just because you say it's a pandemic, it doesn't mean you have to go run and hide. All diseases, or especially contagious diseases, go through a pandemic stage. It simply means it's gotten out of the bag and it's going to go through the population. A lot of those do that. That doesn't mean they're deadly. Some of them are, but most of them are not. And the number of people who die from them is exceedingly small. I mean, we're talking about like seasonal flu. Yeah, there are thousands of people that die from seasonal flu every year, and it's horrible. We don't like that. But don't forget, most of those people that die, even of the seasonal flu, are not dying from the flu, really. They're dying because they're old people, or because they have other conditions, because they're weak, because they have a heart condition or something. So their resistance to any kind of a disease is low. And so the sick and the elderly are always going to be the first victims. I don't care whether it's COVID-19 or the bubonic plague or seasonal flu. The sick and the elderly will be the first victims to go, and that's what you should be looking at. Now, for all the rest of these seasonal flus and SARS and the swine flu and the bird flu and all these other things we're all revved up to run to the hills and prevent. They're just like any other seasonal type of flu. Yeah, people die from it, mostly the old and the sick. Now, what about the rest of the people, the middle-aged people, and especially the young? Some of them might actually have some symptoms. They get a cough or get a fever for a few days. We've all haven't we have a cold every year, some of us? I haven't had one in a long time, by the way, but I used to have a lot of them. Before I started to build up my immune system, I was always catching cold or getting the flu. But I didn't die from it. A couple of times I had to go to bed. Oh man, I really felt bad for a couple of days. Those are pandemics, ladies and gentlemen. You go through the countryside and they're nothing necessarily to be alarmed about. It's just a way of life. Now, how is the best way to save lives for that vulnerable segment of the population, the elderly and the sick from other conditions? The best way, these experts say, is to let the viral spread go on as quickly as possible. Get it over with. Don't flatten the curve. You hope that the curve will peak, so it'll end quickly. You have to have herd immunity, and then it's all gone. And the reason they say that is because that the longer it lasts, the longer time the old folks and the sick are exposed to it. And those are the ones you are saving the lives by peaking it, and there'll be fewer deaths among the old people and among the very sick people if you let it peak and get that herd immunity as quickly as possible. If you flatten the curve and spread it out, the young people and the middle-aged people, it's not going to make any difference. They're not going to die from it anyway. But it's the old people and the sick people that will die from it because they're exposed to it for a longer and longer period of time, and their chances of contracting it are better. So ladies and gentlemen, all this nonsense of shelter in place and save a life is, I've got to clean this up and say, nonsense. And not only that, it's criminal nonsense because it is costing lives. It's not saving lives. And finally, what else can I say on this? Well, I guess the big question is why? Why is it happening this way? And I'll say it as bluntly and honestly as I can without trying to exaggerate or to avoid the truth. Just say it the way I see it. It's because of money and power. The money is to be made in the pharmaceutical industry. And the power is to be obtained from the political industry. And when you get big pharma and big government together, you've got some very powerful forces to drain the pockets of the American people for money and to take away their liberties and make them subservient to your control. And there's nothing faster that will do that than a pandemic. Possibly invasion by a foreign force. That's why wars have always been used by despotic systems, because they scare their citizens so badly with the fear of an invading tyrant that's going to kill everybody that they'll forget about the fact that they don't like their leaders very much, their own tyrants, and they'll just buckle down and follow them as leaders against this foreign foe. That's why Machiavelli, in his book called The Prince, advised all the princes who would take his advice, if you want to keep the population under control, always have a war going on or the threat of war, so they will have to align themselves behind you as their great leader. The same thing goes true with pandemics and other great threats. That's why, in my view, why we're always being scared to death by something. To keep us afraid of terrorism or wars or now pandemics or pornography or who knows what. I mean, something, environmental destruction, global warming, always afraid so that we can't think straight and we'll be willing to accept any insult against our privacy, any tax, any confiscation of our personal property, any control over our personal lives, all because we're afraid. We're afraid of this great threat, and we must do what we must do. That's the key trick that's been going on here. Meanwhile, the pharmaceutical company's not doing too badly. They're making a product. As you know, in case you didn't know, think about it. The products that come out of big pharma, as they like to call it, as I like to call it, big pharma makes products that don't cure anything. Wouldn't that be stupid? People have come out, whistleblowers have come out of big pharma, and they said, you know, I used to be a drug pusher, a drug representative, and I had to quit because I realized that our products weren't curing anybody. What they were doing was controlling the disease and keeping the people on the meds for the rest of their lives. The whole purpose of our industry, these people say, was to make sure that people stayed sick so that they needed our products for the rest of their lives. This is the business model, and you can understand it if you're on the board of directors of a big company and you're making a product. Wouldn't it be silly to make a product to put yourself out of business? We have to understand this is the reality out there. So when people like Bill Gates come along, and he's heavily invested in all the vaccine manufacturing companies, and when Mr. Gates stands up and says, you're going to be locked down, we're not going to be able to go back to normal till every man, woman, and child in the world gets one of my vaccines into them, and you just think, sure, he gives away millions of dollars supposedly to help people remain healthy and avoid diseases. But for every million he gives away, he gets back 6, 8, 10, 12 million in the sale of these products. Vaccines, just think, a vaccine paid for by governments, which means paid for by taxes, no marketing required, no competition required. A vaccine that might make $10 or $20 or $50 profit to every human being on the planet. And not just once, but over and over and over again for the rest of their lives. And we won't even go to the question of whether their lives will be extended or contracted as a result of this. But you can imagine what I think about that. I think my 3 minutes are up, probably went longer than that. But those are the thoughts that come to mind when someone asks me, what do you think about COVID-19 and what's going on? And that's kind of a brief introduction to what's going on in my mind. And if you're interested in the rest of it, why, I invite you to come to our website, which is called redpilluniversity.org, and just look at some of those videos. Prepare yourself to spend some time, maybe a couple of hours, splash around, look at these experts, listen to what they have to say, and make up your own mind. So that's it. That's my message. Thanks for listening.